I want to piggyback on some of what was heard already, and I just want to throw a question out. What would you do if I told you that a simple invitation can change the world? Just a simple invitation can change a relationship, can change a family, can change a world. I want to tell you a quick story about a couple. I've asked them for their permission so I can share this. But their names are Richard and Samantha, right? Richard and Samantha lived their whole lives, married lives, as what they had termed CEO Christians. They went to church on Christmas, Easter, and other special occasions, right? And Richard and Samantha lived a fairly comfortable and okay life. Every Saturday was spent with friends and braaiing and drinking, and that was kind of the norm. They had 2 kids, and life was okay. Things were happy, things were stable. Right? Around maybe 15 years ago, 14 years ago, Richard loses his job. And all of a sudden, when you remove finances from the equation, things get wonky and relationships take on strain. Right? And Richard loses his job for an extended period of time. And it places strain on the marriage, and it places strain on the family life. The things that they were holding on to had no longer been foundational enough to build a life on. Right? The good times with friends and the braais on a Saturday night were no longer able to sustain the life that they were now experiencing. There's a desire there for something more. Samantha describes this and says, what had happened was someone had invited her to Alpha, but she had paid no attention because church was not necessarily a solid place for them right now. Church wasn't necessarily the place they were going to go to find this comfort, but they've got 2 boys, and both boys are watching as the family tries to make sense of this new financial paradigm. The family tries to make sense of this new world that we are now living in. Samantha then decides, hey, I should probably take this invitation to the Alpha course a little bit more seriously, but places at the back of her mind. And one day she's driving past this church, and there's this huge banner on this church that says, "Who is Jesus?" And the next thing says, "Come and find out," right? And she remembers the invitation from Alpha, and she makes the link between the two. She goes home and she tells Richard, there's a church. They don't know who Jesus is. It's an Anglican church, and she was a Methodist, and she goes, the Anglicans don't know who Jesus is. So why don't we go tell them, right? And the 2 of them go on this Alpha course where they encounter Jesus. And that encounter with Jesus saves their marriage. And that encounter with Jesus transforms their life. That encounter with Jesus transforms the things that they once held on to now placing it on a firm foundation and a solid rock. And they've got 2 boys watching. Right? The gospel of Jesus didn't come to my house through a microphone. It came through a meal. Right? The gospel of Jesus transformed my entire family, and as I watched my parents' lives transformed, I said, there's got to be something more to life than this. I was 17 years old trying to make sense of life. 17-year-old dealing with dating the wrong person. Well done, Diego. 17 years old, right? Trying to make sense of being an older brother while holding on to a marriage that wasn't quite working. 17 years old with the recognition that our school fees weren't being paid and that actually we might just lose the house. But then Jesus did something and it made me sit up. Right? An insecure 17-year-old encounters the power of the gospel through an invitation extended to his parents and completely changes his world. Right? Since that point, there hasn't been a year that my parents haven't missed doing Alpha. They went back every year. Every year they go back. They've now got a litmus test. If anyone wanted to date me and my brother, the first question wasn't, where does she come from? It's, did she do Alpha? Right? Because they had discovered the power of an invitation. They had discovered the power of a simple invitation that had completely transformed their lives and completely transformed the world. The genius of Alpha is that invitation is an invitation into the wonder of the gospel. And now the other day I was sitting in the sauna in gym after a very hard gym session. I know, you were wondering, I was also wondering. But I'm sitting in the sauna and I'm sitting alone kind of in my thoughts, and in barges this young person, a young boy. And before I can even greet him, he greets me and he just begins to talk. right? He tells me his whole life story. He starts off by saying, yo, it's hot in here. And then I want to respond by saying, imagine what I was going to be like, but I didn't do that, right? And so he tells me his whole life story, and I don't have a chance to get a word in. And as he's about to leave, the only thing I wanted to share the gospel with him, but the only thing I could say is, I'm actually from a church down the road, and we've got this thing on a Wednesday night, why don't you join us? And then it left there. Maybe a month later, that boy walks into our Alpha course and is in my Alpha group now. And this past week, he asked the question, he said, Keenan, how do I place my faith in Jesus? Right? A simple invitation in a sauna in the gym, completely transforming his life. You can pray for him because he's still asking that question. In John's gospel, Jesus begins to draw his disciples to himself. And as he does that in John chapter 1, actually, it says that the first thing Andrew does when he discovers who Jesus is he goes and tells his brother. The first thing he does is he runs to Simon and he says, come, let me show you, we've found the Messiah. Jesus with the woman at the well, the woman has an encounter that completely transforms her life. And scripture tells us she goes back and says, come and see the man who had told me everything about my life. Come and meet the man who had completely transformed my life. You see, before people believe, they belong. And before they belong, they are usually invited. A simple invitation that can transform your world and the world of the person that you are inviting. Why does this matter? Now, see, we live in a world that is hyper-connected yet deeply lonely. We work with young people, and particularly amongst our Gen Zs, there's this search for meaning and longing that we are slowly beginning to discover is not coming through our cell phones. Right? We live in a world where we can instantly be connected to people across the other side of the world, and that's a really good thing. But that connection is not long-lasting. It's not deep enough, right? That connection is fleeting. And so often we focus our churches on content when actually young people are seeking connection. And the reality of Alpha is that Alpha is built on a meal. It's built on a conversation. It's built on a question. It's built on this idea of discovery. Come and find out for yourself. Come and discover for yourself. I love the stories that we heard because time and time again in the stories, young people say, I didn't know I could ask that question. I didn't know there were other people asking the same questions. I didn't know that I could be invited to discover for myself. I didn't know that there was actually a space where I could come and ask the stuff that I've been so scared to ask. Alpha is built on that. It's built on connection around a table. It's built on inviting people into the wonder of the hospitality of Jesus. And today we've been talking about evangelism. And we have many ideas or strategies for evangelism, but the reality is that evangelism is an invitation. It's an invitation to come and discover. And this is an Alpha conference, and Nicky Gamble actually says that if he can find another course, he'll do another course, but God seems to be using Alpha, so we're going to use Alpha. And Alpha is just that. It's an invitation to come and discover. If we look at the life of Jesus, we see Jesus preaching in synagogues, but in Luke's gospel, what Jesus does all the time is he's at a meal, and then he moves to another meal. In Luke's gospel, he's either coming from a meal or he's going to a meal. Jesus invites us into a hospitality that builds connection. A hospitality that sits around a table and says, how do we discover the wonder of who God has created us? John Mark Comer put it this way. He says, we impress people with our strength, but we connect with them in our weakness. Hospitality is how we open the door to connection. See, the table becomes the most radical space for mission. We get to sit down, we get to eat a meal, we're on level ground, and we get to ask the questions that we are not often comfortable with asking or don't have the confidence to ask. And there's this phrase that we use on Alpha is that the talks are where we have an opportunity to share what we believe, but then in the conversation we have an opportunity to listen and to learn and to hear what other people are believing and thinking, right? It's in the conversation that we begin to discover what the question is that we are trying to give an answer to. And Alpha becomes that tool for culture change. It becomes a tool for an evangelism that says, let me invite you into something more. Let me invite you to discover the wonder of Jesus for yourself. Young people want to be invited to discover for themselves. We've heard that throughout the day, that the most effective way to engage with this generation is to allow them to talk. It's to meet them where they are at. It's to listen to their questions. It's to discover who they are as a whole person. It's to build connection instead of content. It's to awaken stuff in them that God has placed in them and allow them to see that He has created them for a purpose and for a purpose in the earth, right? And so when we sit around the table, we are opening up that connection for discovery. What I love about Alpha is that Alpha removes the pressures and the add-ons and just invites us into the presence. There's a food, there's a talk, there's conversation, and then there's freedom to disagree. For the past 12, 13 years, my family has been actively invested in serving people through the Alpha course. Right? My parents are part of the team at our church where they're leading a small group, and they all come back every year to lead a small group because they understand the value of the invitation that they had received, right? And so what happens is they know what it's done in their lives, and so they want it to happen in other people's lives. But Alpha is working. It's working as a tool of evangelism. It's working to connect with young people. It's working to connect with old people. And it's not working because it's Western. It's working because it's human. It's working because it connects with a person. It's working because we have an opportunity to view the whole person. Tell me your whole story. Tell me where you come from. Tell me what you're facing. Tell me what's challenging you. And often we discover that the question is a theological question, but the conversation is more relational and personal. Right? It's the lady at the well who, when Jesus begins to tell her about her life, turns the conversation theological and says, "Where do you worship?" Jesus is like, "We're not talking about worship here. We're talking about you." The question is, who is Jesus? It's a theological question. The conversation is relationship. Who is Jesus to you? What is Jesus in your life? How are you discovering Jesus for yourself? And so it works because it connects with a human being, right? It doesn't work because it's clever. It works because it's kind. There's no pressure. There's no judgment. There's just presence. And see, what it does is it invites us to create these spaces of invitation and belonging. It invites us to challenge our church to be people who invite. Because everyone knows someone who needs to know Jesus, right? All of a sudden, evangelism isn't something that I can't participate in because I don't have the eloquence of speech, or I don't have the persona, or I don't have the charisma to do evangelism. No, what you do have is the power of a simple invitation. You can invite a friend. You can invite a family member. You can invite your neighbor. You can invite your barber. You can invite your hairdresser. Like this, there's power in a simple invitation. You have no idea what your invitation is going to do in the life of the person that you're extending the invitation to. And so we want to be creating a culture of belonging. And we need to evaluate our churches. And we need to ask, are our churches spaces of belonging? Do the people who come, do they feel like family or do they feel like guests? Is our church focused on a stage or on a table? Are we inviting people and inviting others into something that is worth staying in? See, I am passionate about the invitation because of what it's done in my life. I am passionate about inviting people to invite people because I know what God can do with a simple invitation. I know that my life would have looked completely different had someone not invited my parents on an Alpha course. And see, I had desires for my own life. I had a plan. And you know, when you're 15, if everything's going to work out, you're going to earn 100,000 by 21, right? That's the trajectory. That's where I was going. I had a plan. I was going to get there, right? There's 3.5 children at 22. Like, I was going to get there. I had a plan. But Jesus was crafting a far better story than I could have ever imagined. Jesus was crafting a far better story and a far more holistic story that invited the world into the wonder of who He is. He has used my life in ways that I can't even begin to imagine. Right? He has used the story of my family in ways that we can't even begin to conceptualize because of the power of a simple invitation. My challenge to you, as we hear the stories of those who were invited, as we hear the stories of those whose lives were impacted by an invitation, my challenge to you is, who is waiting on the other side of your invitation? Whose family is being transformed on the other side of your invitation? As you invite them into the wonder of who Jesus is, Alpha provides an opportunity to sit down, to have a meal, and to discover. See, we don't need to be famous, we just need to be faithful with the invitation. It's not about us. I love what was said earlier. We are pointing away, right? We, like said, we become a signpost. I'm not inviting you to myself because, man, let me tell you about my life. There's nothing special about me. But I'm going to invite you to something that is far bigger than I am. And I'm going to invite you into something that is worth sticking around for. Something that is worth staying around for. We don't need to be famous. We just need to be faithful with the invitation. And my prayer is that as we leave here today, as we leave here empowered and ready, as we leave here with faith being stirred in our hearts again, that we would leave here recognizing that we are participants in all that God is doing in the world. And that we have the power of a simple invitation. A simple invitation that can invite people into the wonder of who God has created them to be. And then I want to encourage us to challenge our churches, our organizations, to challenge the people in our circles, the Christians particularly in our circles, to recognize the power of their invitation. To recognize that they too have an invitation to give. And that invitation is into the wonder of the gospel of Jesus. We invite to Alpha because Alpha is a tool. But we're inviting into something far bigger. Man, we're inviting into the gospel. The life-transforming gospel of Jesus. Amen. Amen.